12 operators sat in a room at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and nobody spoke. The fluorescent lights above the folding tables buzzed the way they always do in government buildings. There were no windows. There were no ranking officers in elevated chairs. There was a whiteboard at the front of the room with a mission timeline written on it. 12 men had been awake for 31 hours, sitting in metal folding chairs. The first person to speak was a sergeant who had been in the unit for less than 8 months. He pointed at the whiteboard and said what went wrong. An operator with 15 years of combat experience had to sit there and listen to someone half his tenure take apart every decision he had made in the field, in front of the rest of the squadron, with nowhere to go and no rank to hide behind. This is what Delta Force calls an after-action review. And in the American military, nothing like it exists anywhere else. Every military unit on Earth conducts some version of an after-action review. The United States Army runs them at every level, from basic training platoons to division headquarters. When something goes wrong in a conventional unit, a report goes up the chain of command, an investigation is opened, paperwork is filed, and a commanding officer decides who gets a letter in their file and who does not. The institution absorbs the failure, processes it through hierarchy, and the individual operator goes back to their bunk waiting to hear what the system decided about them. Delta Force does the opposite. In Delta's after-action review room, rank does not exist as a social currency. A first-year operator can walk to the whiteboard and dissect the decisions of a master sergeant in front of the entire assembled element. No one intervenes, no one pulls rank, no one goes through an aide de camp or schedules a meeting with legal counsel. The after-action review room operates on a single principle. Performance is the only thing that matters in this building, and every operator in this room depends on every other operator to perform, so everyone gets to weigh in on whether someone did their job. Former Delta operators who have spoken publicly about the unit describe the after-action review culture as something that takes a significant adjustment period to understand. The military selects for hierarchy tolerance. Officers and enlisted personnel spend entire careers developing sophisticated instincts about when to speak and when to stay quiet based on who is in the room. Delta strips that out. A new operator sitting in their first after-action review, watching a colonel get his decisions broken down piece by someone with a third of his time in service, has to recalibrate everything they thought they knew about how military organizations function. The after-action review has no script and no protection. Former operators have described the sessions as brutal honesty with zero ego protection baked into the structure. You sit in that room and you account for every decision you made, every second you hesitated, every communication gap that opened under pressure. The people asking you to account for those things are the same people who will be in the field with you next week. To understand why Delta built this system, you have to go back to the Iranian desert in April of 1980. Operation Eagle Claw was the mission meant to rescue 52 American hostages held inside the United States Embassy in Tehran, Iran. The Carter administration authorized a joint operation that would include Delta Force, U.S. Army Rangers, Air Force combat controllers, and Navy and Marine Corps helicopter crews. The plan required 6 Navy RH-53C Stallion helicopters to rendezvous with Delta operators at a staging area in the Iranian desert called Desert 1. From there, the force would move toward Tehran, carry out the rescue, and extract by helicopter to an airfield outside the city. On April 24, 1980, at Desert 1, 3 of the 6 helicopters became inoperable. One had rotor blade problems. Another suffered hydraulic failure. Without the minimum aircraft required to carry out the full mission, the on-site commander decided to abort. During the withdrawal, a refueling RH-53C Stallion helicopter collided with a C-130 Hercules transport aircraft on the ground. The resulting fire killed 8 American servicemen and left classified equipment burning in the Iranian desert. The mission had not even reached Tehran. The Holloway Commission, named after retired Admiral James Holloway, conducted the official government review of Eagle Claw. The commission found failures in planning, inter-service coordination, and command structure. The operational security requirements of the mission had prevented the kind of full combined rehearsal that might have caught the coordination problems before they became fatal. For Colonel Charlie Beckwith, the founder of Delta Force, Eagle Claw was not a failure of individual operators. It was a failure of system design. The training pipeline had not been calibrated to handle joint operations at that scale. The planning process had not been pressure tested against realistic contingencies. The command structure had not been built to enable the kind of real-time adaptive decision-making that a mission inside hostile Iranian territory required. Beckwith used the Eagle Claw after-action process as the architectural document for rebuilding Delta's internal review culture from the ground up. The lesson he extracted from the desert was this: the system has to be able to hear what went wrong from everyone who was there, at every level, without the chain of command filtering the signal before it reaches the people responsible for fixing it. Eagle Claw died in part because the information that would have prevented it never reached the right people in time. Delta's after-action review culture was designed to ensure that this never happened again. 13 years later, in the streets of Mogadishu, Somalia, the system was tested under the most brutal conditions Delta Force had faced since its founding. The Battle of Mogadishu on October 3rd and 4th, 1993, began as a daylight raid to capture lieutenants of Somali warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. Delta operators working as part of Task Force Ranger were the assault element. The raid was expected to take no longer than an hour. 2 Black Hawk UH-60 helicopters were shot down over the city by rocket-propelled grenades. What followed was an 18-hour running battle through the narrow streets of Mogadishu, in which 18 Americans were killed and 73 were wounded. Delta Force operators fought for those 18 hours alongside Army Rangers, Night Stalker helicopter crews, and a small Pakistani tank column that reached them near dawn. The operational footage and subsequent accounts documented individual acts of extraordinary performance under sustained fire. 2 Delta snipers, Master Sergeants Gary Gordon and Randall Shugart, voluntarily inserted into a crash site surrounded by hundreds of armed Somali fighters to protect a wounded Black Hawk pilot, knowing the odds they faced. Both men were killed. Both were awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. What happened in Delta's after-action review room after Mogadishu was, according to former operators, one of the most significant internal reviews in the unit's history. It was not about medal recipients or exceptional performances. It was about examining what could have been done differently at every stage by every element of the force. Delta's internal after-action review of Mogadishu focused squarely on the unit's own performance inside the tactical situation it faced, not on task force leadership decisions or the political decisions in Washington that left the force without heavy armor support. The question Delta asked itself was specific. Given what we had, given where we were, given what we faced, what could we have done better? The aftermath of Mogadishu drove direct changes to Delta's urban warfare training protocols and to the medical support systems the unit operates in the field. Combat controllers and pararescue integration into Delta operations became more formalized. The after-action review of Mogadishu, painful as it was, produced operational improvements that the unit carried into every subsequent conflict. If you have been watching Delta Force content on this channel, you already know about the selection attrition rate and the pipeline that filters operators before they ever reach a squadron. But here is something the selection videos do not cover. Passing selection is the beginning of the evaluation, not the end of it. Delta operators serve under what amounts to a continuous performance review that has no formal end date and no bureaucratic protection. In the conventional Army, you serve your assignment, you get your evaluation report, and you move to your next duty station. In Delta, the decision to remove an operator from the unit can happen at any point during his tenure, and the mechanism that drives that decision is not a commanding general reviewing paperwork. It is the people on his team. Former operators describe what they call the voted off the island dynamic in terms that have no real equivalent in standard military culture. The team decides. The squadron decides. If the people whose lives depend on your performance determine that your performance is no longer trustworthy, the conversation happens. And an operator who is in the unit on Monday may be back with his parent unit by Friday. No courts-martial, no formal investigation, a conversation, and then a reassignment. The reason this is more feared than formal military punishment is not complicated. A courts-martial is an institutional process. You can prepare a legal defense. You can have representation. You can appeal. The institutional machinery of military justice is slow, formal, and operates on rules of evidence and procedure. The team does not operate on rules of evidence. The team operates on whether they trust you when the shooting starts. And once that trust is gone, there is no appeal process that gives it back. The distinction Delta draws internally is between two categories of failure. Understanding that distinction explains why the system produces excellence rather than just punishing people until they quit. Training accidents and mission failures caused by genuinely uncontrollable factors are treated as learning events. The after-action review process dissects them to extract the lesson, and no one treats a mechanical malfunction or an unforeseeable intelligence gap as a character indictment against the operator in the field. Delta expects its people to operate in the fog of war, and the fog of war produces outcomes that no amount of preparation can fully prevent. The category that triggers a different response is narrower and more specific. An operator who froze in a doorway under fire. An operator who made a communication error that compromised the element's position. An operator who, in the judgment of his teammates, performed below the unit's standard in a moment that mattered. That category opens a different question, and the question is not what happened. The question is whether the team can trust that it will not happen again. Some operators who fail in that specific way never return to their parent unit through a formal removal process. They leave because they cannot trust themselves anymore. The internal accountability culture of Delta is so internalized, so completely adopted by the operators who survive selection and the post-selection training pipeline, that the peer judgment mechanism is almost secondary. The operators themselves hold the standard, and when they fall short of it in a way they cannot explain to themselves, they often make the decision before the team makes it for them. The architecture of what Delta Force built in the aftermath of Eagle Claw and what it refined through 2 decades of combat operations is a system designed to make failure personally unacceptable before it makes failure institutionally costly. No military regulation can enforce a standard at the level Delta operates at. Regulations describe what happens after a failure is documented. Delta's culture operates before the failure occurs, in the preparation, in the planning, in the relentless self-assessment that operators carry into every mission they run. Former operators who have written about the unit consistently return to a single formulation. You are only as good as your last operation, not your career, not your medals, not your years of service. The last thing you did in the field, in front of the people who were there with you, is your current standing in the unit. In the conventional military, a bad day is a data point in a long record. In Delta Force, a bad day is a conversation that could end everything. The debatable question that Delta's after-action review culture raises, and the one former operators continue to argue about in memoirs and interviews, is whether this system is too brutal to be replicated outside a Tier 1 Special Operations unit. Some argue that the psychological weight of continuous peer evaluation is only survivable for operators who are already selected for extreme stress tolerance and pathological persistence. Others argue that the absence of this kind of accountability in conventional units is exactly why conventional units perform at a lower ceiling. What is not debatable is what the data shows. Delta Force runs a higher volume of direct action operations per year than any comparable unit on Earth, against more complex targets, with fewer catastrophic failures on record. Whatever the peer accountability system costs its operators personally, it produces a performance standard that no court-martial, no formal investigation, and no general officer review has ever produced in any other corner of the American military. If this kind of institutional psychology content is what you came for, the video on why Delta Force can fire an operator at any moment covers the contractual side of what we talked about today. The peer removal mechanism and the formal removal authority exist in parallel. Together, they create a system where no operator is ever truly secure, and no operator is ever truly finished being evaluated. The 12 operators at Fort Bragg eventually went to sleep, woke up, and ran the same mission profile they had run the day before. The critique from the 8-month sergeant did not leave the room. The 15-year veteran said nothing about his rank when he responded to it, because rank is not a defense in that building. The next time those 12 operators were in the field together, Every man in that element knew exactly where every other man had succeeded and where every other man had come up short. And they trusted each other more because of it, not less. That is the mechanism Delta Force built, not a punishment system. A trust-building system that uses ruthless honesty as its primary construction material. The question is not whether you can survive that kind of accountability. The question is whether you were ever good enough to be in the room.